Shawn Diddy Combs was convicted on 2 federal charges, each carrying up to 10 years in prison. But now, in a twist maybe no one saw coming, reports say President Donald Trump's team has been in talks with Diddy's lawyers about a possible presidential pardon. Could Trump really set Diddy free? Is this justice, politics, maybe payback?
The air in the courtroom had long since gone stale. The sentence had been handed down. The cell doors had closed. Shawn Diddy Combs was officially inmate number, no longer the mogul, no longer the untouchable icon, just another name in the system.
In Shawn Diddy Combs' conviction on 2 federal sex crimes charges, could he be pardoned by the President of the United States? You know, that is a question that came up a lot when we were doing the live streams of the Diddy trial every day on YouTube. I never really considered it as a real possibility, but I'll tell you what, now, based on current reporting, we may have to take this seriously. Oh, and in terms of relief for Diddy, we also have to get into his defense team's new memo that they filed arguing that his conviction should be thrown out, or at the very least, he should get a new trial. We're going to talk about that too. And by the way, let me tell you, we have an amazing guest who I'm going to be bringing on in a little bit, somebody who actually helped secure federal pardons for his clients, including from President Trump, and is an expert in criminal law, has been following this case from the very beginning. I'm going to bring him on in a little bit. But why do I say that we have to take pardons seriously now? Why? Well, TMZ has reported that President Donald Trump's administration has been talking to Diddy's legal team about a potential pardon, a forgiveness for a federal crime. It's enshrined in the Constitution. Article 2, Section 2, Clause 1, the president shall have power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. And according to TMZ, his decision to pardon Diddy may be determined based on if Judge Arun Subramanian grants Diddy bail, which, by the way, we dedicated a whole sidebar to the other day. His team just filed a brand new letter with the court asking for him to be released. I broke it down, discussed all those arguments. But TMZ also has reported that the pardon decision could also come down to how Diddy is ultimately sentenced on October 3rd. And remember, he was acquitted of racketeering and sex trafficking, but he was found guilty of the 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution, the Mann Act violations, namely transporting his exes, Jane and Cassie Ventura Fine, and men across state lines for the purposes of sex work. Each charge carries up to 10 years in prison, although I'll tell you, in a prior filing, the government was looking at roughly 4 to 5 year prison sentence. Mind you, this is before a pre-sentencing report has been prepared for the court, which does a full background check and analysis of Diddy's life and crimes. Now, the defense would definitely love time served and he gets out, or 21 to 27 months. And remember, at the time of sentencing, he'll have been locked up for a full year, so he'll get credit for that. And the judge has discretion here because there's no mandatory minimum when it comes to these charges. But anyway, as you know.
But what no one saw coming was the curveball, Donald Trump. The man who once led the country, now stepping into the shadowy fallout of the music industry's biggest downfall. No press release, no grand announcement, just subtle moves. Legal contacts whispering about interest from high places. Strategists making midnight calls. The stirrings of power reactivating itself. And suddenly, the Diddy case was no longer just a scandal. It was a campaign. A new war over justice, politics, influence, and redemption. Inside his prison cell, Diddy was losing control, but not his instincts. He had built empires from chaos before. He could sense something shifting. The guards treated him differently now. Not better, just carefully with distance.
President Trump even called him a good friend on a 2012 episode of his TV show, The Apprentice. Problem is, some comments Diddy made about Trump in recent years as Diddy really entered the political realm. There's a video where he's speaking to radio host Charlemagne saying, "If Trump gets elected, I really do believe in my heart there'll be a race war." In another video on Revolt, he says white men like Trump need to be banished. And by the way, you know who's not letting anyone forget this? Combs' rival 50 Cent. Took to social media recently, wrote, "See, Trump don't like S like this, buddy. You run your mouth too much." And Donald doesn't take well to disrespect and doesn't forget who chooses to go against him. While working tirelessly to make America great again, there is no room for distraction. He would consider pardoning anyone who is being mistreated, not Puff Daddy. And let me tell you, the idea of Trump pardoning Diddy is not getting a ton of love out there. Conservative commentator Megyn Kelly posted on X, "Trump should not pardon Diddy. He doesn't deserve it. He's a Trump hater. He's a woman abuser. MAGA is already upset over elites seeming to cover for each other. This would not help. GOP struggling with young female voters, most of whom will hate a Diddy pardon. And then you just had other random accounts like America First. What? He's actually considering this? Diddy is a depraved, abusive, sexual deviant who should be spending the rest of his life in prison. If Trump pardons him, he will get absolutely crushed. Who is advising him lately? It's looking like straight up sabotage at this point. There were other accounts that were not in favor of it, although there was this account. Milo posted on X, Trump has no choice but to pardon Diddy after the government, led by James Comey's daughter Maureen, simply lost interest in Diddy's guilt the moment they secured his tapes incriminating powerful Democrats. The prosecution was a shambles. The trial was a farce. Now, I want to talk about if this is really going to happen, how it would happen. Also, if it really depends on bail and sentencing, then what are we talking about? And I have somebody who not only has been following the Diddy case from the very beginning, not only is a renowned criminal defense attorney, but actually has obtained federal pardons from the president, including from Donald Trump. By the way, for his clients Kodak Black and Lil Wayne, those were maybe the most notable. I'm joined by Bradford Cohen. Bradford, thank you so much for coming here on Sidebar. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Jess.
Now, before I even get into the pardon, okay, there was a bit of breaking news before we were going to come on. This is what I want to get your opinion on first. So Combs' defense team filed a memo in support of a motion for judgment of acquittal, or in the alternative, a motion for a new trial. And basically, I know you read through it, but basically the evidence, they would say, is insufficient to sustain that conviction. Their main arguments is really echoing what we've talked about a little bit when it came to the bail analysis, but that his prosecution, his conviction on these Mann Act prostitution charges is so unique. He wasn't profiting off of this business. All consenting adults were involved. The jury didn't find that there was any sex trafficking. They argued this isn't even prostitution per se, it's voyeurism, that the intent wasn't for people to travel for sex for money, but he paid them for their time. Everybody was having a good time. He makes a First Amendment argument that the freak-offs and the hotel nights were performances that were typically videotaped so they could watch them later on. It's just amateur pornography. And then finally makes the argument that he was prejudiced because of all the other evidence that came in to prove RICO or sex trafficking, and would have never came in if he was merely being prosecuted for prostitution, particularly the Intercontinental Hotel footage of him purporting to beat up Cassie Ventura Fine. And he says, at the very least, he needs a new trial. I hand it over to you. You think this is a successful argument?
Thank you. I don't know if it's going to be successful in the judgment of acquittal. I think the argument is interesting because everyone agrees he might be the only person in custody right now that has ever been convicted of the Mann Act. The Mann Act, and it gives a nice history of the Mann Act, and a lot of people don't understand what the Mann Act is, but the Mann Act was enacted because of a racist motivation that white women were being recruited by people of color to go across state lines and make money. So actually pimping those women across state lines and making money off of their...
With uncertainty. Because when Trump's name enters a legal battlefield, everything changes. And behind the scenes, the machinery began grinding. Trump's former advisors started floating language like selective prosecution, double standards media witch hunt, conservative, pundits who once had nothing but disdain for. Hollywood now made room for a narrative that painted Diddy as the victim of a cultural vendetta. It wasn't about guilt or innocence anymore. It was about leverage, and Trump knew exactly how to use it. Back in the prison, Diddy started asking for updates every hour. His lawyers were back on speed dial. Emergency motions were filed. His team demanded review of trial records, court procedures, even jury selection. Suddenly, the idea of an overturned sentence wasn't just a fantasy. It was a possibility, and in that possibility, Diddy came alive. The once defeated man now walked with fire in his veins. He wasn't playing defense anymore.
Sexual exploits. Obviously, that's not the case here. It's used so infrequently, it might have been a handful of people were actually charged with the Mann Act. No one in custody currently has ever been convicted of the Mann Act. So it's an interesting argument to say, hey, listen, this Mann Act, the original reason for it was racist. The original way that it was applied was racist. The way it's applied here is incorrect because he was not making any money from quote unquote pimping or getting these women across, or men getting them across state lines. None of that was being done. This was all being done for entertainment purposes. So it's an interesting argument. I don't think this judge buys it. It might be interesting on an appeal, but I don't think the judge is going to give him a judgment of acquittal on those 2 counts based on the argument. Now, the more interesting argument to me, and it's their last argument for new trial, is that, listen, if you were just going to charge him with these 2 counts, which I originally said when I looked at all the evidence, and don't forget, I was getting calls during this trial from individuals that were telling me, hey, I have information that exonerates what they're saying against Shawn Combs, essentially saying that Cassie and others were participating more than just having sex in a room. They were participating more than that. They were paying people, they were hiring people, they were sending me pictures even when Diddy wasn't around. They were asking me to come over even when Diddy wasn't around. These are what these witnesses were telling me, which is really Brady evidence. And I don't know if that was ever turned over. But the more interesting argument is that all these counts were charged. The only thing he was convicted of were the Mann Acts, and he probably wouldn't have been convicted of these Mann Acts but for all this other stuff that came in to try and prove these counts that they could not prove and did not have a basis for bringing.
Let me just challenge you on that, because this is a jury who didn't find that there was sex trafficking, and I can't confirm that they found him guilty of the Mann Act because of the hotel video or anything else. I mean, it seems to me that they might have convicted him on that based on the travel records, the payment receipts, all about that, not even necessarily allegations of violence. I mean, do you think that it was because of, let's say, the Intercontinental Hotel video that he was convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution? It always felt to me that they proved that charge based purely on, the documents.
Well, I always feel like during a trial, whenever you get a guilty verdict on one of the counts or 2 of the counts out of 6 or 7, you think to yourself, is it because of these other things that they brought up? How bad he is, he's not a good guy, the video came out. Sometimes juries will split the baby, meaning, there's people that want to convict, there's people that don't want to convict, and they're like, okay, let's convict him on these acts. We can all agree we can convict him on these acts. He's not a good guy. He transported these men across state lines. Let's convict him on this. There's always going to be a question of that. The only way to not have a question of that, obviously, is when the jury comes out, someone gives an interview and says, hey, this is why we did it, is because, this tape was so bad and these other incidents were so bad that we were like, we can't just let him walk with nothing. So we convicted him on the Mann Acts. Now, we don't have a juror saying that. Do I think eventually jurors are going to start coming out? Yeah, I think so. I think some of these jurors are going to come out. They're going to want to do some interviews, not before sentencing. And I think after sentencing, I think some of them will come out and we'll discuss it, because I think that was the feeling I was getting from this jury and the reactions they had to Comey's closing, and even the reaction just in general to the 5 or the 6 U.S. attorney team.
He was plotting, planning, pushing. He called it a resurrection, and the world was starting to notice. Outside the prison gates, the media machine went into overdrive. Headlines once filled with conviction and finality were now littered with one word: reversal. It was a term that hadn't been entertained in months, but now it was echoing through newsrooms, legal circles, and political backchannels. Because if there was one man who could drag a courtroom battle back into the public spotlight, it was Donald Trump. He didn't need to be in the courtroom. He didn't need to shake hands with Diddy. All he had to do was apply pressure where it counted. Leverage political contacts, get the right pundits asking the right questions, feed doubt into the bloodstream of public opinion, and he did. This is what happens when the system targets the wrong people. Trump said in a televised interview, "They've done it to me. They're doing it to others. This case deserves a second look." He didn't say Diddy's name. He didn't need to. The message was clear. And just like that, the case was back in the headlines. Legal experts were brought on to prime-time news shows. Some dismissed the idea of overturning the sentence. Others admitted the trial was unusually fast, unusually intense, and heavily influenced by media pressure. That's all Diddy needed.
Their reactions in general were very noticeable, and I think that this is a jury that wants to talk to people once I think he gets sentenced.
Okay, so now let's move on to the pardon discussion. So if he can't get relief from the court in getting the conviction thrown out or a new trial, can he get relief through a pardon? Before we talk about, is this a real thing, what is the process to even obtain a federal pardon? How do you even go about that?
Sure. So it's a pardon or a commutation. If someone is actually in custody, they could also get a commutation, which does not wipe the crime off your record. It just allows you to get out of jail. So he has that option to give him a commutation. If he gets sentenced, he can also give him a commutation. But as for the process, there's an application on the DOJ website, and I'm part of some charities that also do a lot of pro bono work for pardons and commutations. You can fill out this form, website. It essentially lists, the reasons why you should get a pardon, what kind of community service you've done, things of that nature. There's a separate application for a commutation, but you can file a pardon application, and you could also say, hey, listen, if it's not a pardon, I'm looking for a commutation. You attach your indictment. You would reasons why you feel your crime was you were unfairly prejudiced or unfairly convicted. All of those things go into the packet. I always try to help people that are filling it out on their own to show them, what to point out. Those type of cases are always heartening, because those people deserve pardons. They deserve commutations if they're in, and it's some sort of crazy drug offense that was brought up in the 90s. All of those things are reasons for pardons and commutations.
So is this real? I mean, here's the thing. He is in a much better position to get a pardon or a commutation of his sentence because he wasn't convicted of sex trafficking and racketeering. There is a way to justify this based on some of the arguments I just mentioned that his defense team is making, that maybe he shouldn't have been brought up on this. The I Mann Act, not as serious as what he's facing. Is this real? Do you think that this is going to happen? That he's going to get a pardon or a commutation from President Trump?
So I don't know if he's going to get one. I do think that it's real because, like I said before, President Trump, whether they like him, don't like him, if he feels something is wrong, and we've seen this happen before in the past, if he feels something is wrong, someone got railroaded, someone was convicted, wrongfully, he will take a look at that. Yeah, Shawn Combs has said things in the past that probably were not great. I've read them, but I think that if anyone understands that, I mean, look at President Trump's cabinet. There's individuals on his cabinet. His vice president has said things in the past that weren't great for him. But he understands that people evolve, will change their minds. People understand that there's certain requirements, things that are going on, certain pressures that they're under. And I don't think that would affect whether or not he would grant a pardon or commutation based on things that were said in the past. I think it would be based on what he gets sentenced to, or based on the facts of the Mann Act, that the Mann Act itself, I think, is unconstitutional. I think there's issues the way that it was applied in this case.
But from an optics point of view, I don't know, moral point of view, what about everything that came out of trial? The texts, the bruises, the intercontinental tape. It's not like you can say Diddy is totally clean, that he's a complete angel. Yes, he was acquitted of the most serious charges, but the evidence that came out during the course of the trial, wouldn't it be difficult for the president to justify maybe pardoning Diddy?
A crack in the wall. Inside the prison, Diddy could feel the storm building. He started preparing statements, started rehearsing interviews in his mind. He requested a notepad and started jotting down names. Journalists, allies, enemies. He wasn't just hoping for release, he was planning his return. Meanwhile, Trump's orbit continued to stir. Anonymous sources leaked that a group of former DOJ officials were reviewing the case. Influential lobbyists were allegedly pushing for intervention. The message was being seeded across the political spectrum. Diddy's sentence might not stand, and the effect unmistakable. The judge who had sentenced Diddy was suddenly receiving public scrutiny online. Petitions began circulating. Protests started forming outside court buildings. What had once been a case of guilt was now being spun into a case of overreach. Diddy's lawyers jumped at the momentum. They filed a motion for retrial, citing external influence on the jury. A long shot? Absolutely. But with Trump now unofficially aligned with their client, long shots suddenly felt like real chances. And inside that cold gray cell, Diddy felt it too. He wasn't locked away anymore. He was waiting for the door to crack open again, because the man who once owned the room, the club, the airwaves, the culture was now closer than ever to reclaiming it. And this time he wouldn't come back quietly. The media pivoted almost overnight. Networks that once vilified Diddy began asking if the justice system had gone too far. The narrative wasn't cleaned up, it was weaponized. Diddy's story was now being used as proof that the courts were broken, that fame made you a target, and that even icons could be crushed under political weight. And Trump, he watched from the sidelines, smirking, because this wasn't about Diddy the man. This was about Diddy, the symbol, a high-profile figure railroaded by the system. Or, at least that's what Trump's orbit wanted people to believe. He didn't need to exonerate Diddy. He just needed to make people question what had already been decided, and it was working. Diddy's legal team, newly emboldened, began talking directly to the press. Not through statements, through interviews, full-throated, defiant appearances on podcasts, on conservative talk shows, on live streams where they could frame the trial however they wanted. Words like misconduct, unfair, and targeted prosecution flooded every appearance. And when asked about Trump, they didn't flinch. We're grateful to anyone with the courage to step up and question this outcome. One of Diddy's attorneys said, no matter who they are. Inside the prison, Diddy was growing restless, but focused. He wasn't breaking down anymore. He was gearing up. He knew exactly how to control attention. He'd done it for decades. He wasn't just watching his redemption arc form. He was directing it from behind bars. He requested media access. He asked to release a written statement. When denied, he passed notes through his legal team. Lines like, "The truth always rises," and "You can cage the man, not the movement," appeared across social media. It was classic Diddy, part mogul, part myth, all momentum, and Trump's base, they ate it up. They didn't care about music. They didn't care about the past. They cared that someone, anyone, could be used to prove the system was rigged. And now, Diddy had become their unlikely poster boy. Allies of Trump began floating ideas privately: commutations, sentence reviews, early release programs. Few bold voices even called for a pardon. The message had officially gone nuclear. This wasn't fringe anymore. This was mainstream. A special investigative committee announced they would review cases of public concern involving procedural inconsistencies. Diddy's name was on the short list, and in that moment, the man who once ruled studios and nightclubs was now at the center of a legal and political firestorm that stretched all the way to Washington.